Good morning, everyone. I am Samantha Belsinia, and together with my partner, Miss Arlene Grace Baal, we will be talking about the Philippine Constitution. So, every state or a nation has had a constitution of some form, whether it be an elaborate document or just a collection of rules. It is inconceivable for a nation or a state to survive without a constitution of some form. So, before diving into the different constitutions the Philippines had, let us first define what is a constitution. So, a constitution is the foundation of the system of the government. Ito ang pundasyon ng sistema ng pamahalaan. Also, it upholds the body of rules and principles. Itinataguyod nito ang kalipunan ng mga alituntunin at prinsipyo alinsunod sa kung saan ang soberanya ay isinasagawa o ipinapatupad. Also, a constitution covers how a country needs to be run and how to lead the nation towards certain points of independence. And lastly, a constitution establishes the powers of the government. Nagtatatag ito ng kapangyarihan ng pamahalaan. Maaari nitong tukuyin, limitahan at ipamahagi ang mga kapangyarihan sa tungkulin ng pamahalaan. So it could define, limit, and distribute the powers of the government. So now that we have talked about what is a constitution, let us now go on to the first constitution, which is the 1897 Constitution of Biak na Bato, o kilala rin bilang Constitution Provisional de la República de Filipinas or the Provisional Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. At kung sasabihin natin na ito ay isang provisional constitution, ibig sabihin, ito ay isang pansamantalang konstitusyon na naglalayong maglingkod sa transitional na panahon hanggang sa mapagtibay ang isang permanenteng konstitusyon. So this was promulgated on the 1st of November of 1897, and the Republic of Biak na Bato had a constitution drafted by Isabelo Artacho and Felix Ferrer. So madali lamang natapos ang konstitusyong ito, for it only operated from November 1 of 1897 up to December 14 of the same year. So isang buwan lamang itong nagtagal. And the Constitution provided for the establishment of a Supreme Council and outlined certain basic human rights such as freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and the right to education. So natapos ang konstitusyong ito nung sumuko sila Emilio Aguinaldo at nang patapon sa Hong Kong. And by the time that December 15 came around, a truce between the Spanish colonial Governor-General Fernando Primo de Rivera and the revolutionary leader Emilio Aguinaldo to end the Philippine Revolution. So the Spaniards and the Filipinos didn't trust each other. As a result, periodic clashes between the two groups continued even after Aguinaldo's departure from the country. So the 1897 Constitution of Biak na Bato preamble reads, "The separation of the Philippines from the Spanish monarchy and their formation as an independent state with its own government called the Philippine Republic has been the end sought by the revolution, and the existing war began on the 24th of August 1896, and therefore in its name and by the power delegated by the Filipino people, interpreting faithfully their desires and ambitions, we, the representatives of the revolution, in a meeting at Biak na Bato on November 1st, 1897, unanimously adopt the following articles of the Constitution of the state." So, right after the Philippine Revolution was the Philippine independence. So we then have this next constitution, which is the 1899 Malolos Constitution. So this constitution is also known as Constitución Política de 1899 or the Political Constitution of 1899 at isinulat ito sa Espanyol. Its purpose was, it is the basic law of the first Philippine Republic, and ito ang kauna-unahang republikang konstitusyon sa Asia. And it was written by Felipe Calderon y Roca and Felipe Buencamino. So this constitution was also promulgated on January 21 of 1899 and was in operation from January 23, 1899 up to March 23, 1901. At ang mga kapansin-pansing tampok ng konstitusyong malolos ay ang mga sumusunod. So the salient features of these constitutions were the declaration of the sovereignty of the people, the enumeration of the basic civil rights, the separation of the church and the state, and the creation of the Assembly of Representatives to act as the legislative body. So this constitution is the first important Filipino document ever produced by the people's representatives. At ayon sa ika-4 na artikulo ng politikal na konstitusyon, ang pamahalaan ng republika ay popular, kinatawan, kahalili at responsable at dapat gumamit ng tatlong natatanging kapangyarihan. So, it established a democratic republican government with 3 branches, ang ehekutibo, lehislatibo at ang hudikatura. At ang alinmang dalawa o higit pa sa tatlong kapangyarihang ito ay hindi dapat magkaisa sa isang tao o kooperasyon o ang kapangyarihang pambatas na ipinagkaloob sa isang individual. So, the preamble of the 1899 Malolos Constitution reads, "We, the representatives of the Filipino people, lawfully convened in order to establish justice, provide for common defense, promote general welfare, and ensure the benefits of liberty, imploring the aid of the sovereign legislator of the universe for the attainment of these ends, have voted, decreed, and sanctioned the following." So, and then the next one is, upon the arrival of the Americans to the country, they implemented the Acts of the United States Congress. So, the Acts of the United States Congress was in operation from December 10 of 1899 up to March 24 of 1934. And dalawa sa batas ng Kongreso ng Estados Unidos na ipinasa sa panahong ito ay itinuturing na kabilang sa konstitusyon ng Pilipinas. Sa kadahilanang ito ay tumukoy sa mga pangunahing prinsipyong pampolitika at itinatag ang estruktura, pamamaraan, kapangyarihan at tungkulin ng gobyerno ng Pilipinas. So the first act of the United States Congress is the Philippine Organic Act of 1902 o kilala rin bilang the Philippine Bill of 1902 or Cooper Act. So may akda nito ay si U.S. Congressman Henry Allen Cooper. That is why it is also called as Cooper Act alinsunod sa apelyido ng may akda nito. So it provided for the creation of the Philippine Assembly and a bicameral legislature composed of the upper house, which is the Philippine Commission, and the lower house, which is the Philippine Assembly. And it enumerated the Bill of Rights for the Filipinos. Katulad ng konstitusyon, ito rin ay bumabanggit ng mga karapatang Pilipino tulad ng karapatan para mabuhay, makakuha o makabili ng mga ari-arian, maisagawa ang kanilang relihiyon, sumailalim sa nararapat at tamang proseso, gamitin ang kanilang mga obligasyon, tamasahin ang mga kabayarang nararapat sa kanila, at ang malayang pagpapahayag. So these were the bills enumerated in this Act of the United States Congress. So this act also provided for the appointment of 2 non-voting resident commissioner of the Philippines that represents the country in the United States House of Representatives. So the next act of the United States Congress is the Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916. So this is also called as the Jones Law, and it was authored by William Atkinson Jones, which is why it is also called as Jones Law. Alinsunod sa apelyido ng may akda. So this act amended the structure of the Philippine government provided by the Philippine Bill of 1902. Inamyandahan nito ang estruktura ng pamahalaang ng Pilipinas na unang ibinigay sa Philippine Bill of 1902. So it modified, revised the structure of the government given in the first act of the United States Congress. At ang Jones Law rin ay lumikha ng unang ganap na nahalal na lehislatura ng Pilipinas. Inalis nito ang Upper House o ang Philippine Commission at pinalitan ng Senado kung saan ang mga miyembro ay ganap na inihalal ng mga botanteng Filipino. So it removed the Upper House and replaced it with the Senate, whose members were fully elected by the Filipino voters. So the next act of the United States Congress is the Tidings-McDuffie Act of 1934. So this is the also known as Philippine Commonwealth and Independence Act, and it was authored by Senator Millard Tydings of Maryland and Representative John McDuffie of Alabama, which is why it is called nga Tydings-McDuffie Act, alinsunod gyapon sa apelyido sa authors. So this is a U.S. statute that provides for the Philippine independence to take effect on July 4, 1946, which is when the Treaty of Manila took place, and it is also the date of commemoration of kanang Philippine and the American Friendship Day after a 10-year transitional period. So this act of the United States Congress was signed by the U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 24, 1934, and was sent to the Philippine Senate for approval. So, bagaman hindi ito isang konstitusyon mismo, ang Tidings-McDuffie Act of 1934 ay nagbigay ng otoridad at tinukoy ng mga mekanismo sa pagtatag ng isang formal na konstitusyon sa pamamagitan ng isang constitutional convention. So although the Tidings-McDuffie Act isn't really considered as a Philippine constitution, but it paved the way to the creation of the next constitution, which is the 1935 Constitution, via a constitutional convention which was held on this period, which is during the 1934. So moving on to the next constitution, which is the 1935 Philippine Constitution. So ang konstitusyong ito ay isinulat noong 1934. So this Constitution of the Philippines was written in 1934. As what I have said in the past act of the United States Congress, it paved the way for the creation of this Constitution. So it was written in 1934 and was approved and adopted by the Commonwealth of the Philippines, which is from 1935 up to 1946, and later used by the Third Republic of the Philippines, which is from 1946 up to 1972. At isinulat ang konstitusyong ito na may layuning matugunan din ang pag-aproba ng gobyerno ng Estados Unidos upang matiyak na tutuparin nito ang pangakong ipagkakaloob sa Pilipinas ang kalayaang ipinangako at hindi magkaroon ng basihan na hindi pa ito ready for a independent rule, independent government. At yun na nga. So originally, the 1935 Constitution, among other things, for a unicameral legislature and a single 6-year term for the president. Kung sasabihin natin unicameral legislature, ito ay tumutukoy sa isang katawan na gumagawa ng batas na binubuo ng isang grupo na inihalal na opisyal or a law-making body made up of one group of elected officials. So it was amended on the 1940 to have a bicameral legislature composed of the Senate and House of Representatives and a creation of an independent commission on elections. So the Constitution also limited the president to a 4-year term with a maximum 2 consecutive terms in the office. So the preamble of the 1935 Philippine Constitution reads, "The Filipino people, imploring the aid of the divine providence in order to establish a government that shall embody their ideals, conserve and develop the patrimony of the nation, promote the general welfare, and secure to themselves their posterity of the blessings of independence under a regime of justice, liberty, and democracy, do ordain promulgate this Constitution." So, so right after this is the We all know that by the 1940s came around, we were then conquered by the Japanese and the World War II took place. So we then have the 1943 Constitution. So this Constitution is a Japanese sponsored constitution, and it also established the Second Republic of the Philippines. So before going into the Constitution itself, let us first talk about the Second Republic of the Philippines. So the Second Republic was established during the Japanese occupation. Naitatag ang republikang ito sa panahon ng mga Hapones at ang pamahalaang Japan ay nagtatag ng isang administrasyong militar sa bansa, gayon din ang komisyong tagapagpaganap ng Pilipinas. Kinilala rin ang Kalibapi na idinisenyo upang maging nag-iisa at eksklusibong organisasyong pampolitika noong panahong iyon. So the Kalibapi is the sole and exclusive political organization during that period. And pinangakuan rin tayo ni Premier Hideki Toho ng kalayaan sa ilalim ng kondisyong pag-aalyansa ng Pilipinas at Japan. So the Philippines was promised with independence by the Premier Hideki Toho under the condition of alliance with the Japanese. So the Constitution, ang Kalibapi noon ay inatasang bumuo ng PCPI or the Preparatory Committee for the Philippine Independence na siyang inatasan rin na bumalangkas ng bagong konstitusyon na siyang 1943 Constitution. So the Constitution was approved on September 4 of 1973 and was ratified on September 7 of 1943 as with Jose P. Laurel as its president. So by October 14, 1943, the inauguration of the new republic took place. So let us now talk about the Constitution itself. So the Constitution was in operation in Japanese-controlled area from October 14, 1943 up to August 17 of 1945. So, the 1943 Constitution, however, was the United States and the Commonwealth government did not acknowledge this Constitution. So, Laurel then dissolved the Second Republic following the surrender of Japan in the World War II. And the 1943 Constitution has a preamble and 12 articles. At ito rin ay lumikha ng republikang estado na may kapangyarihang sangay ng ehekutibo na binubuo ng isang sangay ng tagapagpaganap, subordinate na pambatasan, at isang sangay ng panghukuman. So it had a executive branch, subordinate legislative branches, and judicial branches. So the preamble of this Constitution reads, the Filipino people, imploring the aid of the divine providence and desiring to lead a free national existence, do hereby proclaim their independence in order to establish a government that shall promote the general welfare, conserve and develop the patrimony of the nation, and contribute to the creation of a world order based on peace, liberty, and moral justice, do ordain this Constitution. And for the next constitutions, my partner, Miss Erlene Grace Baal, will be discussing it to the class. Miss Erlene, please take the floor.
So, maraming salamat, Samantha. Now, moving on to the next constitution, we have the 1973 Constitution. Here in the 1973 Constitution, it was promulgated by the 1973 Constitutional Convention after Marcos declared martial law. So, ang konstitusyon na ito ay ipinahayag ng Konbensyon ng Constitutional taong 1973 pagkatapos itinatag ang martial law ni Marcos, where this constitution ruled the Fourth Philippines Republic from January 17, 1973 up to February 22, 1986. So ito ang konstitusyon na nagpuno sa ika-4 na Republika ng Pilipinas mula January 17, 1973 hanggang February 22, 1986. There is also a unicameral legislature was established during this period, whose members were elected for a 6 years term of office. So sa politika at gobyerno, ang unicameral legislature ay isang law-making body made up of one group of elected officials. This constitution also provides territory o ito ang konstitusyon din ay nagbibigay patungkol teritoryo. Ang 1973 Constitution ay inamendahan ng 4 na okasyon. Ito ay sa taong 1976, 1980, taong 1981 at taong 1984. Sa taong 1976 na amendments, ito ang pinaka-controversial. Bakit? Kasi una, sa konstitusyon na ito, ang National Assembly ay napalitan ng batasang pambansa. Pangalawa, the president who became the prime minister exercised legislative powers until martial law lifted. So, sa 1980 naman, na amendment, ang edad sa pagretiro ng mga miyembro ng judiciary ay napagbigyan hanggang 70 taon o 70 years. Sa 1981 naman na amendments, the false parliamentary system ay formal na binago into a French-style semi-presidential system kung saan ang executive power was restored to the president and the prime minister was a mere head of the cabinet. Ang 1984 naman na amendment ay kung saan inalis ang executive committee at binalik ang posisyon sa vice presidente. These are the salient features of the 1973 Constitution. First is the parliamentary government with prime minister and a president. Second is the legislative powers was vested in a unicameral National Assembly elected by the people. And third is legalized all decrees, proclamations, and orders of the president. Dito sa 1973 na konstitusyon naman, meron tayong gobyerno, di ba? So, ipinahayag sa Artikulo 2, Section 1 na ang Pilipinas ay isang Republican state. So, ito ay demokratikong estado. Sovereignty resides in the people and all governmental authority emanates from them. Ang gobyerno din ay may 3 sangay. Ito ang sumusunod. Una, ang presidente o itinatawag din na executive. Pangalawa, ang legislatibo o legislative. Pangatlo naman ay ang judiciary o judicial power. Sa legislative o legislatibo, there is only one legislative power and it is under the so-called Batasang Pambansa. So, let's now move on to the preamble of the 1973 Constitution that reads, "We, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of divine providence in order to establish a government that shall embody our ideals, promote the general welfare, conserve and develop the patrimony of our nation, and secure to ourselves and our posterity of the blessings of democracy under a regime of justice, peace, liberty, and equality, do ordain promulgate this Constitution." So, moving on to the next Constitution, which is the 1986 Constitution, or also called the Freedom Constitution. Also known this is as Freedom Constitution. So this Constitution is a verbatim copy of the 1973 Constitution minus the provision of the Batasang Pambansa. Bakit minus the provision of the Batasang Pambansa? Kasi ang Batasang Pambansa ay tuluyang inalis. And right after the 1986 People Power Revolution that compelled President Marcos to step down from power, President Corazon Aquino issued a proclamation number 3 to serve as a provisional constitution, which is then Aquino vested in herself both executive and legislative powers. Ito ay isang transitional constitution that lasted for a year. And then, automation was created to draft the new Constitution, which now leads us to the current Constitution, the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Pero bago tayo pumunta doon, basahin muna natin ang unang parte ng Proklamasyon number 3. Whereas the new government was installed through a direct exercise of the power of the Filipino people, assisted by the units of the new armed forces of the Philippines, whereas the heroic action of the people was done in defiance of the provision of the 1973 Constitution as amended. Whereas the direct mandate of the people as manifested by their extraordinary action demands on the complete reorganization of the government, restoration of democracy, protection of basic rights, rebuilding of confidence in the entire governmental system, eradication of graft and corruption, restoration of peace and order, maintenance of the supremacy of civilian authority over military, and the transition to a government under to a new constitution in the shortest time possible. Whereas during the period of transition to a new constitution, it must be granted that the government will respect basic human rights and fundamental freedoms. Wherefore, I, Corazon C. Aquino, President of the Philippines, by virtue of the powers vested in me by the sovereign mandate of the people, do hereby promulgate this following provisional constitution. So, moving on to the next constitution, let's now continue to the 1987 Philippine Constitution, which is our current until now. Ito din ay kinakilala bilang Anti-Marcos Constitution. Now, the 1987 Constitution revolves around 4 themes. First is upholding of national sovereignty. Second, democratic governance and the prevention of another dictatorship. Third is the respect for human rights and civil liberties. Fourth is the promotion of social justice. It is not a perfect document, but it is the country's highest law binding all the citizens of the Philippines. Hindi man ito ang perpektong dokumento, pero ito naman ang bansang pinakamataas na batas na nag-uugnay ng mga mamamayang Pilipino. The 1987 preamble was the world's longest preamble. Ito ang nagtatala ng mga hangarin, ideya, at inspirasyon ng mga mamamayang Pilipino. So, basahin muna natin ang preamble of the 1987 Philippine Constitution. We, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God in order to build a just and humane society and establish a government that shall embody our ideals and aspirations, promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, and serve and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of law and a regime of truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace. Do ordain and promulgate this Constitution.
So that ends our discussion on the different constitutions the Philippines had. And one last thing, I would like to ask this. When can you say that a constitution is well written? Kanasa ka makaingon nga ang isa ka constitution maayo pagkasulat and pagkabuhat. So for us, to answer that question, it has to be broad, brief, and definite. Then you can say that a constitution is well written. Broad in a sense that it is comprehensive, brief, direct to the point, and definite in order to avoid confusion and misinterpretation. And so that would be all. And here are our references for the topics that we were able to discuss earlier. Daghang salamat. Maayong buntag. God bless, be blessed, and be a blessing.